Constitution makes the first and foremost responsibility of the federal government to provide for the common defense. That is actually in the preamble of our Constitution. And in our modern world, those that are seeking harm to our nation, to our citizens, to our companies, they really can use many very different means, including attacks over the Internet to attack our nation. And recent cyber attacks on U.S. companies like Sony or Target or Home Depot not only harm these companies, Mr. Speaker, but they also harm the American citizens who do business with them, putting their most personal, private information at risk. And these threats, as are well known, are coming from nation-states like North Korea, like Russia, like Iran, China, as well as cyber criminals seeking to steal not only personal information, but also intellectual property and sensitive government information. In today's digital world, we have a duty to defend ourselves against cyber espionage, and the best way to combat these threats is to first recognize a threat and to combine private and government resources and intelligence. And, Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what this bill does. Mr. Speaker, I think this bill will help to facilitate greater cooperation and efforts to protect our nation's digital infrastructure, including power grids and other utilities and other services that everyday Americans rely on each and every day. And by removing barriers, which will allow private companies to voluntarily share their cybersecurity threat information with the Department of Homeland Security and or other companies, I think we will, in a very large way, improve earlier detection and mitigation of potential threats. Additionally, this legislation that we're debating on the floor today ensures that personal identification information is removed prior to sharing information related to cyber threats, and that very strong safeguards are in place to protect personal privacy and civil liberties. And, Mr. Speaker, I point that out because that was something that was discussed a lot by practically every member of the Homeland Security Committee. We were all very, very united on that issue, and I think that's an important, critical component, a point to make, and is reflected in this legislation. As Mr. Radcliffe mentioned just earlier, 85% of America's critical infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector. If you think about that, 85%. Which means that cyber threats pose as much of an economic threat to the United States as they do to our security. And we have a constitutional responsibility, as I pointed out in the beginning, a constitutional responsibility to protect ourselves, to protect our nation, to protect our American citizens from this ever-evolving threat. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would urge that all of my colleagues join all of us on our committee in voting in favor of this important legislation that will provide an additional line and a very important line of defense against cyber attacks. I yield back the balance of my time.